there's a phrase that when we hear it, it means different things to each of us. And it's this. For some of us, less than perfect is just a reminder about how things have gone, right? We wanted it perfect and it didn't come out. For some of us, it's a great shopping strategy. Because you can get less than perfect stuff cheaper than other stuff. And if you're like me, you like to feel good about your purchases, but you also like to save some money. Because it's a double blessing. I'm going to give something they're going to enjoy, and I'm going to feel good that I got it for a really good deal, right? So you're looking for all these less than perfect things, because your question is, what's less than perfect in this particular thing, right? Is it like a shirt that has a spot like underneath the underarm, and it's like, I can get away with that one. Because nobody's looking at underarms, right? But if it's got like a red dot right here, you're going to pass on that, right? And if it's got a sweater with a snag, if the sweater with a snag is any kind of in here, not so good. But if it's kind of down here or like where I would never see it, I'm not going to see it, so it's not so bad. Shoes that are scuffed. And when I look at them and it's like, are they scuffed like somebody took a razor blade to them and it's like pass? Or is it scuffed like, I might rub my feet together? No, it might just look like they're already aged. And I could sell that as, I thought these looked worn and gave that authentic look that people are looking for today, right? But less than perfect is such an interesting statement because, again, it communicates so many different things to each of us. For some of us, it just sounds like failure, right? That we were shooting for perfect, and less than perfect just reminds us that we didn't get there. But I want us to think for just a moment about those moments of perfect that happen in our lives, right? I mean, think about some of these moments of perfect. Maybe your team wins. Maybe they win the really big, the world championship, the national title, whatever the thing is that your team's going after, and they win, and you're just like, oh, this is perfect, right? You just feel excited and joyful, even if you lost a couple games right now, because this is all that matters is you won it all. Or we get the job, and it's the job, not just like I got a job, but it's like, no, this is the job. It's the one I've been working for and studying for and going to school for, and I've just been hoping for and praying for, and I get the job, and it's just like, oh, finally, everything's going to be great because I got it. Or we get the results, right? The results back from the test, and it's always weird that the negative test is a positive and a positive negative, right? I don't know why doctors decided to go that way, but you get the test back and it's negative, which is really good news, right? And it's like, phew, because when you first heard it might be cancer, and you're just like, but to get the news, it's just like, oh, things are back in line. Things are life. This should be. This is perfect. Or maybe you're in that situation where he or she said yes, and it's like, yes, right, because you were a little not so sure, but in the moment, it hits and you're right, and it's like, oh, this is just perfect. It's going to be so wonderful. Or you hold your baby for the first time, right? And all of you who've ever held your baby for the first time, you know how that feels. There's just something about holding the baby just for a moment that gets like, oh, they're perfect. Then you begin to think of, what am I going to do with this thing? And that changes the whole story. But in the moment, it's just perfect, right? And if you don't remember those days, maybe it's, as you watch them sleeping, because maybe you can't hold them any longer, but you sometimes you peek in, and it's like, oh, man, if they could just sleep all the time. But it's just so perfect, right? Because in those moments, it's quiet. You get a chance to reflect, and the memories, all that. Those moments of perfect, and they feel so great. But while we've all had some of these moments, we've also had moments of less than perfect, right? Those moments when things didn't go as planned. In fact, they didn't just not go as planned. They went like terrible. Our team loses. And they lose either like they got blown out losing, or they lose them this last second thing that was, should have been a call, and why did they call a foul? And but they lost. And after all this time, you're just let down. Or, we lose the job. We get reorganized, right? Well, we get the results, and this time it's positive, which is not good, right? And everything we were thinking about and planning for and what we were going to do all now stops and begins to focus on, what am I going to do in this moment? Or maybe he or she said no. For some of us, that's a hard, what do you do? How do you come back from that moment? Or maybe we hold them for the last time. It's one of those moments of less than perfect that none of us wants to have to experience. And that all plays into this time of the year because the reality is we want this time of the year to be special because it is special. And you think about all the things, most of us, have some kind of gatherings that we're either going to travel to or have people travel here and, try to be with family or friends or some kind of way to celebrate however we celebrate Christmas. But you think about in those moments, what we hope for in those celebrations. We hope for smooth, right? Season prayed about that, right? Smooth, everything be right in place, and when it doesn't go, you have to kind of rethink that. But we hope for smooth, right? We hope for problem-free, especially for some of us like, oh, Jesus, please. Just this one Christmas, let's not have any problems, right? You hope everyone gets along because you know your family. And you know how it could go, and you hope how you work hard trying to deflect every time it begins to have that conversation, try to move it, right? But let's be honest, what we hope for at this time of the year is really perfect. And it's funny how we go about doing this, right? Because we get everybody together to take the picture, and if we got kids, not everybody plays along. Or if you got some old guy, he doesn't want to play along, right? It's like, just for the moment, quick, take the picture so we can kind of pray that everybody looks great. In the moment, it looks perfect, knowing that before that moment and after that moment, nothing was perfect. Because one of the things we love to do is convince ourselves of things that aren't true. But while we hope for all those things, sometimes it's less than perfect, right? Maybe your mom or dad are bringing over their latest friend this Christmas, right? And you don't know which number this is or how many it's been, but just like, all right. Or maybe your brother's late again, right? Or he shows up drunk again or high again. Maybe the conversation goes that way that nobody wants it to go, but it goes that way, and it just becomes this free-for-all, and people yell and screaming and leaving, and it's like, and it's a reminder that sometimes even our best laid plans don't always work out that way. But let me ask you, what if less than perfect is more normal than we might think or wish? What if less than perfect really is more in line with how life goes and actually just happens, as opposed to this perfect thing, this social media snapshot about everything is just right and just in perfect spots? Because here's the truth. The very first Christmas was messy. And we're going to start today, and we're going to look at different messes over the next few weeks today, just an overview of it all. But the reality is none of it went the way anyone had planned. In fact, we're going to pick up the story. There are two people that write about Jesus' birth and the early part of his life. It's a guy named Matthew who wasn't there, but obviously picks up the story later. Maybe hears it from Jesus or hears it from Jesus' mother or, somewhere he gets some stories. Luke, who isn't there either, but comes along later, he writes some stuff. And so those two together, and they tell some similar stories and they tell some different pieces to the story. So we have to put them both together to get a flow of it all. But let's just go start with how messy it was, right? So beginning in Luke chapter 1, it says this, that the angel came to her, and this is talking about Mary. The angel comes to Mary and says this to her, "Greetings, rejoice." Now, I don't know if you've ever had an angel come see you. I haven't had one, but if you have, but just the idea they're going to say, "Hey, greetings, rejoice," right? The Lord has blessed you. The Lord has favored you, and the Lord is with you. Now, Mary, we don't know a lot about Mary. So we just make some assumptions about who Mary was. Well, I mean, we know she was a young Jewish woman. We don't know necessarily what age, but kind of guessing by how old people were when they got these, they were contract, they made this negotiation between family. My son's going to marry your daughter, and here's what the exchange, and this is how it's going to work, and there's a whole thing. And, it wasn't like they fall in love kind of stuff. It's like you're together. It's good for everybody. He'll treat you well. She'll treat you well. It's all good, right? So, and that typically happened, women were, betrothed a little bit before, but kind of got the official thing when they're like 14, 15 years old. So she's probably a 14, 15-year-old young woman. Now, if you're 14 or 15 years old, don't take this as a slight, but pretty much everybody older than you thinks that's way too young. Now, I know you think, no, I'm there, and in your mind you are, but I just want you to say, it's kind of like, wow, that's pretty young, and thinking, oh, that's going to happen. But she probably just thinks, she's going to go through life. She's going to marry this guy. She's going to raise a family. She's going to live in this town probably for her whole life, never leave it for any reason. She's going to live, die. There'll be no stories necessarily told about her. Nothing to remember her by other than her family. She would just be another faceless and nameless person in the crowd. But this angel shows up. Greetings. You're favored by God. And oh, by the way, God's with you. And I love how Luke tells us that Mary responds. He says this. He says, but Mary was startled. The understatement. In fact, the word means more than startled. It means disturbed. It means perplexed. It means troubled. And she's troubled, perplexed, all that by what the angel has said to her. And she wondered what sort of greeting this was. Because it's not what you would typically think the angel would say. But she said, what does this mean then? Greetings, you're favored by God, and God's with you. And then I love what Luke says happens. Like the angel says to her, don't be afraid, Mary. Which I think is like too late. The angel should have opened with that, right? He should have been, hey, by the way, don't be afraid. It's like if you had kids, and they're in school, and you get a call from the school. And they always say, what's the first thing they say? Your child is fine. To which we all think, well, I'm glad they're fine, but I know you're calling for a reason, so they may not be that fine. But right, don't be afraid, Mary, right? Too late. Because, he says, you have found favor with God. Because apparently he can see how she looks on her face like, what in the world's going on? And her brain's scrambled of what's going on. Your mind's going, hey, you're favored by God. In fact, he goes on, listen, look. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son. And you're going to name him Jesus. And he's going to be great. And he's going to be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord's going to give him the throne of the King David, which is like huge. I mean, that's like the thing they've been hoping as a nation, as people of hoping and praying for. And he will reign over the people, the house of Jacob, forever, and his kingdom will never end. Which is like amazing stuff. And here's this young lady, this girl, and she's trying to get her mind around all this because Israel hasn't had a king in something like 500 years. They've been under everybody else for so long. To think that her son's going to be this and all this amazing stuff, and more than just a ruler like David, I mean, Son of God. I mean, the language is like beyond her. and I love what Luke says, how she responds to this amazing, almost overwhelming news. Here's what she says. This amazing story is laid out. This is what's going to happen. And she doesn't really, at the moment, thinking about that story. She's thinking about her story. I mean, how can this happen? I'm a virgin. Boys and girls, if you don't know what that is, when you get home, ask mom and dad. New Hope, bringing families together again. I mean, Mary's like, I missed a little bit of school, but I don't think on that day of biology I missed that lesson, right? But she's like, how is this possible, right? Because it sounds all great, but literally it says, I haven't been with a man. And the reality is, here's what happened. Everything just got a lot more messy, right? Because how she thought life was going to go, brakes, squeal, stop. It's going in a whole different direction. In fact, for her, nothing in her life from this point forward would be as she expected it would be. In fact, there's multiple times as you read the story about the life of Jesus that we're given some insights of what Mary's thinking or wondering about. And it seems like this ongoing thing is that she's sometimes caught off guard, sometimes sure about who Jesus is, and other times not so sure about who Jesus is. That even her expectations of what might happen were less than perfect. I mean, think about it. I mean, here's just a brief snapshot of early on, right? She's pregnant before the wedding, which back then was like, right? I mean, it's still not a great idea, but back then it was like, everybody's going to talk. Okay, she's in the small village, and so the word's going to spread, right? And not only that, she is pregnant by someone other than her fiance. Which leads us to a question, right? How does one explain that to their parents, their fiance, their community? It would be great for us to have a conversation about that because I'm not sure there is any explanation, right? In fact, we know that she must have to explain to someone. We don't get the story of how she explains it to any of them. We don't know how she explained it to her parents, to Joseph, to her community. Clearly, the community finds out some little bit about it because, well, I'm guessing, when it all kind of gets done that they begin to talk and stuff. But I want you to notice how Joseph, her fiance, responds to this. In fact, Matthew, he's going to tell us about Joseph's story. And he says, Joseph, he was a good guy. He was a righteous man, which means that both he was religiously, he did what he was supposed to do, but he was right with God because of more than just the actions that he obeyed God, but even who he had become. In fact, we're told that he's such a good guy that he doesn't want to disgrace her in public. Which is like a really good guy, right, ladies? Well, I thought I'd get a response on that. He's solid. He's the fact that he's saying, listen, that's an interesting story, Mary. Okay. And he could have yelled, he could have screamed, he could have thrown stuff, you could have done all. But he's like, I don't want to disgrace her in public. So he has some feelings towards her, and I think he has some feelings because he is a good guy. So Matthew goes on and says, listen, he planned to divorce her, to end the engagement, just privately, quietly. Which is going to be hard in a little town, but he's going to do his best to just, no comment. We're not going to talk about that, it just wasn't going to work out. Details, he could have done a lot of stuff, but his goal was to minimize the damage to everybody, but especially to Mary. But let's be honest. If she is this, 14-year-old girl who's got this crazy story, she doesn't need any more than she's already carrying, right? So Matthew goes on and says, while Joseph's thinking about all this, right? While he's considering all that's been taking place and how he's going to make this work and what's the best way about this, an angel appears to him, but this time in a dream. And in the dream, the angel says to Joseph, excuse me, Joseph, son of David, descendant of David, right? Don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. And you begin to see a pattern. Angels always say, don't be afraid. Because apparently it's kind of a scary thing, even in dreams. But he's like, hey, Joseph, listen to me. Don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Because the baby in her is from the Holy Spirit. And then the angel goes on and gives the whole explanation of all the other stuff about it. But the amazing thing is, when Joseph wakes up, he does what the Lord's angel had told him to do. That he marries her. And I'm guessing that he goes about and says, okay, instead of doing this quietly, let's go the other way. Let's get this done quick because he can begin to count the days. And, you want to get married as quick as possible so the rumors don't go around too fast. But apparently you can't get married that quick because I'm sure rumors went around. Because we know how people are, right? Psst, you see Mary? She's putting on some pounds. So kind of early for that, isn't it, right? Oh, I think she's pregnant. Oh, well, let's do let's math. Well, the counter. Oh. And in religious circles, what we do is we say, we want to pray for Mary. Not gossiping. I'm just concerned. So let's pray for Mary. And whoever that husband might be. And if it's Joseph, I thought he was a good man. You just know how this all goes. It is a messy, messy thing, right? That just gets messier the more it goes along. And so they're, they're set, right? This has gone on now 9 months, because the next thing we hear from Luke is that Augustus Caesar, the ruler, sends out this decree. And the decree is simply that all the people in the countries under Roman rule, they must register for taxation. Because Rome was all about the money. Because if we can get your money, we can control you. When we get the money, we can, do what we need to do. And it's just this way of getting our empire bigger and stronger. And so there's this decree. And Roman decrees weren't like, I got a thing in the mail. I'll wait for the next letter. I'll wait for the red one, because a lot of us will wait for the red one, right? But it's like, no, this happens, and you need to be there because there's Roman soldiers that are not good guys, and they're going to enforce their law, and it's not going to go well. So this decree goes out. So Joseph, we're told, leaves Nazareth, this town of Galilee, and he goes all the way to Bethlehem in Judea. It's like 100 miles away. And we're told also that Joseph registered with Mary because, hey, he was engaged, he was pledged to be married, and now she was pregnant. So it's interesting here because it sounds like maybe they haven't even done the marriage ceremony yet, right? Which had to add to the whole talk even more through this thing. And I just want you to picture, ladies, this is probably going to be more impactful for you. I want you to think about traveling when you're 9 months pregnant. And your options back then was on a donkey or walking. Because I'm not so sure at 9 months this is a good motion to go through for 4 8-hour days for a normal person, not a pregnant person. You can just imagine Mary and Joseph, and if there's a donkey, how this is all going, right? And how much they have to stop, and how much it's just uncomfortable, and how much Mary, I'm going to just push through it, but they have to get there, they have to be exhausted. And while Mary was favored by God, her circumstances don't seem so favorable, do they? So while they're in Bethlehem, the time's come for maybe to give the baby, and oh, by the way, they couldn't find a place to stay. And so she's there. They're waiting to sign up for the census, to get in line, to pay their taxes. I'm sure every day they line up, and it goes, so far each day, and they have to stop. They have to come back the next day. But she gives birth to her first son. And they lay him in a feeding trough, right, which is like not what she expected to have for her baby, especially a baby that the angel told her is like a special baby. Like, he's the baby of babies. He's the hopes and dreams of all the Israelites, the person they've been looking for and waiting for. And the idea that he is all the stuff, the Most High God, all the stuff. And the only place we have him is in a feeding trough. Because there were no rooms. There was no space left in the inn. Inn is how we have it. It was most likely a caravan shelter, because in that part of the country, they would have these shelters set out about a day's journey. And you would go in, and the structures, I've been in one, they're about the size of this building. And apparently there were so many people in there, it's packed, and so they got another spot for animals, and that's where they had to go hook up. But it gets worse, because things go from uncomfortable to unusual now. Because they're there, the baby's been born, they got the baby, they've held the baby, and all of a sudden these shepherds show up quickly. They've heard this message that, this has happened. They come running. You can imagine they're going through the caravan place, looking for anybody have a baby. Anybody have a baby? Finally, they come to the feeding trough. There's the baby. There's Joseph lying in this feeding trough. And they're like, ah. And you can imagine being Mary and Joseph. These smelly shepherds come running in. They're all piled up. Look at the baby. And then they run off. which is unusual. But it gets even more unusual, because when the time came, the days were fulfilled for Mary and Joseph to do what the law of Moses taught about being made pure. There's a whole process in Judaism about the steps that a pregnant woman has to go through to be gone from being unclean because she's given birth to being clean again, and what you do with the baby and circumcise him if it's a him, 8 months or eight days after birth. And so they go up to Jerusalem to present Jesus to the Lord at the temple, and they go through all this process, make these offerings. And when you get there, if you remember the story, it's like multiple people grab the baby, say crazy stuff about the baby, say things like, "Now I can die," with your baby in their arms, which has got to be a little uncomfortable for you as a parent, right? It's like, just hold my baby, right? You can die, let me hold my baby. But, this is the hope of Israel. They're going on. All these people are these really unusual stuff. But then things go from unusual to unsafe. Because we're told by Matthew that when Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem, during the time Herod's king, so he gives us a time that you can kind of go back and figure out when it is, some wise men, some magi from the east came to Jerusalem. We don't know a lot about them, but clearly they show up and they have an impact, because who's these foreigners? And they're coming to Jerusalem, and they seem to be looking for something, and Herod has a discussion with them, and they finds out they're looking for this king of the Jews, this baby who's been born. Which, if you know anything about Herod was just a little bit, paranoid. He had killed 2 of his wives. I think he killed 3 of his sons and multiple other people, because he felt like they were threatening his hold on the crown. And so now he hears about this baby that's been born, who's king of the Jews, and that's the people he's charged to keep under control. And if they think they have a king, whoa. So he works out a deal with these wise men and says, do me a favor, I'd love to worship this baby too. I mean, these are people I rule. If they have a king, I'd love to be part of it. So, when you find him, come back and let me know. So they get the religious people, and they say, well, the baby's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. So they go, they do all this kind of stuff. And so the Magi come. You remember the story maybe, that they show up, they got all these gifts. It's kind of one of these really strange moments in this piece. But this is when it becomes unsafe, because after they left, talking about the wise men, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Joseph seems to get the dream angels. Mary gets the face-to-face angels. But he gets this dream, and here's what the angel says to him. Get up! Which is like not the kind of dream you want to have, right? You want the one that says, shh, sleep a little bit longer, right? You're going to need your energy. But no, this angel says, get up, take the child and his mother and escape, and flee to Egypt. Go quickly, and, oh, by the way, stay there until I tell you to return. Because Herod is starting to search for the child so he can kill him. So Joseph, being a good guy, does what a good guy does. He doesn't go back to sleep. He's like, Mary, get up, Mary. Get the baby up, get the donkey. We got to get out of here. We're going quick. Because this is like taking a really serious turn. Because now the Romans are after the baby. And if the Romans are after the baby, they're going to find the baby. I mean, that's the thought that goes through his head. And so Mary and Joseph and Mary, they have to escape to Egypt, which is like 200 miles away. You begin to do the math, that's like another 8 days on the trip if everything goes smoothly again, if it goes longer. And the whole time exposed, right, until they get far enough away. They're going to be further from home, because that had to be their expectation. We're going to Bethlehem to sign up. And once we sign up and we pay our taxes, we're going to come back. And now they're further from home. They're further from family. And you all know, if you've ever had a baby, how it's nice to have family close by, right? Somebody to help out in those moments when you are beyond. You're just beyond, right? They're further from what was planned. They're further from what was expected. And then we get maybe the messiest part of the story comes next. Because Matthew says, here's how it played out, that when Herod saw that the wise men, the Magi, had tricked, that they had outwitted him, which really got him fired up. He was furious. Not just furious, he was furious. Because now he's like, I got tricked by these foreigners, and they're covering up for this baby. I bet the Jews are behind it because the Jews are behind everything. I mean, you know how that's kind of crazy talks goes, right? So he sends his soldiers to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem and in the surrounding area. We're going to cover our bases. We're going to go out X amount of miles who were 2 years old or younger. So this is taking a while. And when they said he had been born, they don't know how much months. So, we don't know if this has been a year. And I don't know about you, but when I read this particular passage, my question is simply this. How is that part of the plan, the purpose of God? Because I have to think that when Joseph and Mary hear this story, because this story would have gotten out, when a ruling force begins to kill children, something changes in all of us, right? And I have to wonder if Mary's like, and even Joseph are like, an angel told us to leave, but why not them? And how can this thing be a part of what's supposed to be this great, I'm favored and God is with us thing? And oh, by the way, I don't have an answer for that. Because I think for Mary and for Joseph, it's one of those moments that happens for all of us at some point in life. That something doesn't fit. Something is unexplainable. Something that's a reminder of just how brutal and paranoid and bad people can be to other people. But this is supposed to be a God moment. God coming into this world, breaking history, changing things. But the only thing for me that I can come away with is that this was so messy. It was so less than perfect. And it's a part that just doesn't make sense. But that's kind of true for some parts of life too, isn't it? I mean, think about it. We look for sense in this seemingly random and challenging circumstances of life. Especially for those of us who would consider ourselves people of faith, we think, there's these dots and they must connect somehow. And if you're not a person of faith, maybe even believe in sort of this cosmic kind of thing, that there's some kind of organization, some kind of sense that works it all out. But we want to have this feeling that it all fits together somehow. And the reality is sometimes we find it. Sometimes we hear an explanation. Sometimes something happens. It's like, okay, now I see how that could have happened, or maybe why it could have happened, even though it wasn't a good thing. But also sometimes we don't. But Christmas really is there to remind us that even a God-favored life can be messy. It's a pushback to that belief that sometimes followers of Jesus fall into, that if I'm favored by God, it means everything is perfect, everything's going to be great. Because what if? What if when life is less than perfect, we're in good company? We're in the same company with somebody whose life had been directly interceded by God, whose story was dramatically changed. Because what if less than perfect is the story? And if somehow we could wrap our minds around that, wrap our hearts around that, maybe it would help us not just survive, but even to thrive in our lives, because we understand life in a much different way. Because what What if God isn't looking for perfect faith, but faith that stretches and grows in less than perfect circumstances? Faith that somehow holds on through it all. Something to think about.